when I was told I had 15 minutes, I had to think what I was going to talk about. And we might have 48 bears there today, but we're very well aware that that 48 is just a small percentage of the bears that should have help. But if we can do a better job of talking to people how the animal really is, maybe that number will be down to where there's not so many that need help, and maybe we even really were good, we wouldn't need to have any bears at all. So we spent a lot of time, effort, and money looking after the bears that are there and releasing them back to the wild. We've also, in the last 5 or 6 years, put a lot of effort in trying to get a message out. And that's how this animal really is, because I know we're talking to friends in this room, animal friends, and that makes it easier because there's nobody out there giving us a frown. But there's a lot of people here who are passionate about animals, and the best thing 30 people can do is talk to 10, 12, 20 people and get the message out. Because how the spring bear hunt was lost, in my opinion, and Liz mentioned that earlier, but is that after the spring bear hunt was cancelled in Ontario, a certain hunting organization, Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, spent money and effort spreading a whole lot of, not misinformation, but disinformation, intentional untruths about how the black bear is as an animal. And if the same thing gets repeated often enough, a lot of people start to believe it. And the amount of talks that we do, and we've done 4 in the last 2 weeks, is we speak to animal lovers and people who aren't necessarily animal lovers, but animal lovers who are afraid of an animal won't defend it. And when it comes to the bear, that applies on a fairly large scale. So we talk to people who love dogs and cats, squirrels and chipmunks, but don't like bears. And that's only because they're afraid of them. And what Chief Dan George said many years ago, the last part of his quote, "What one fears, one destroys." So today, for 15 minutes, I'm going to try and help alleviate some of that fear by talking about the bear as it really is. Not mean by nature. If you watch Animal Planet, Discovery Channel, BBC, that's not the image you're going to get when you're done watching their documentaries. So just a little bit about what happens at Bear with Us. The cubs come in as orphans. Can you hear me okay? Does this work? Okay. That's a little brighter. So the cubs come in as orphans or injured. Their mothers are killed, almost always by somebody shooting the mother. Far less often by being killed on a highway, although some other groups will promote that. But even police divisions will say that it's rare to get a call about a bear killed on a highway. It does happen though. And very few of them come in as orphaned or injured due to some phenomenon of Mother Nature. It's humans, almost all the time, if not all the time. So our goal is to care for the cubs, keep them wild for their safety, afraid of people for their safety, and release them back to the area they came from, which is part of our obligation, cooperation with the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. And they've been very cooperative in that area. We wouldn't have 48 bears today if we didn't have a good cooperative working relationship with M&R. Matter of fact, we'd have 3. That's how many bears I picked up myself this last summer. So that gives you an idea how important that cooperation is, because they know, as we know, that it's just a drop in the bucket. And the people who work hard to catch the cubs are not really have any empowerment as far as how to change things. And nowadays, wildlife management is not determined by scientists and biologists, determined by the political climate. It happens in Queen's Park, not at the district level where the animals are actually supposedly under their watch and control. At Bear with Us, we have 89 acres, 36 hectares, 4 large enclosures. And according to M&R guidelines, I'm going to use M&R rather than MNRF, just shortens it down, but it means Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. We have the capacity for 56 bears. The most we've had is 52. We've had over 53 times in 25 years. So the goal is to keep these bears away from people, away from human activity, so they stay timid of people when they're released, and that's for their protection. Because when they get close to people, more often than not, they don't live very long. All the enclosures, outdoor enclosures, have a pond, which is spring fed. Sometimes the spring goes dry, so I have to refill it with tanks of water. But either way, they have a place to swim and play and drink. Orphaned cubs happen all throughout the year. If they're orphaned in the fall, their chance of survival is greatly reduced. If they're orphaned in the spring, their chance is not likely at all. Spring of 2017, in May, I get a call from this lady. She finds this little cub hovered in her garage up near New Liskeard, Ontario. And that's 3 hours from home. So I called the Ministry of Natural Resources there and told them about it. And one of their wildlife technicians went out and picked the cub up, took it home to his wife to care for. I got the next day and the cub was almost dead from dehydration. That's not the fault of the person that picked up the cub. They saved the cub's life. But it's the fact that their mother was killed probably 6-7 days ago, and that cub is just dying of dehydration. So I'm in the truck now, across from the Walmart in New Liskeard, where I picked up some electrolytes at the recommendation of our veterinarian, Dr. Sherry Cox, and feeding this cub with a syringe, holding its head up, helping it swallow by rubbing its throat, because I wasn't sure it would make it home, the 3-hour drive home. This little bear was named Janet, and she survived quite well, and she was released this past summer, same district. And little Janet had to go from drinking milk from her mother nipple to drinking a formula which has roughly the same milk fat content and nutrients. Doesn't taste like it though. I don't think. I never tried it. And not drinking from a nipple, but drinking out of a dish. And I could try and feed her with a bottle and wrestle with her and scare her even more. But I let her just kind of find her way. Within a few hours, she was snorkeling and finally figured out that yes, she can drink that stuff. But had lots of it all over herself. Fortunately, there was 2 other bears at the same age, at the same time, and those 3 all came from the same district. It was Arlo, Thomas, and Janet. We released them all together because they were buddies this past summer. This past June, we get a call from the Ministry of Natural Resources about a large bear. So we don't only look after little guys. Sometimes we have to figure out how to care for an injured large bear. This guy was 187 kilograms or 400 pounds. And you can tell by the photo that Ella took in June of last year that this guy's got a very badly injured jaw. And he's at a dump, but he wasn't seen at the dump on a regular basis. He came to the dump because he was desperate to try and find something to eat. And we watched him trying to lick things out of jars with that broken jaw flopping around, which must have been just horribly painful. And then 2 days later, we went back with a live trap, and he was pretty easy to catch because even though he couldn't eat, he sure wanted to. And with the help of an amazing veterinarian again, Dr. Sherry Cox, we treated this bear for a severe infection in his lower jawbone for 2 weeks to clear up the infection. And then she did a surgery on him. And the lower jaw was broken right behind the lower canines. And to be this large and have teeth like that, he had to be over 10 years of age. So he was no foolish bear. He'd survived 2 bear hunts for a long time. They removed the lower part of his jaw, so he lost his lower incisors and lower canines. We weren't very concerned about that because bears tend to use their lips to pick berries, and lips and tongue and that to pluck grass. And since that's the primary part of their diet, we figured this smart old guy would be just fine without those lower canines. And the big guys are the most timid, the biggest chickens, the easiest to work with because they got to be that big by being very timid and staying away from people. It was not really that difficult to have this bear move out of his enclosure into a catch cage, to clean him out, and then pull him back in. Once he got the idea of what was happening, he'd go in there on his own and come back out. It happened after 3 times. And we called them Jaws. So I set up a couple cameras. I released them by myself, and I set up a couple cameras to watch him go. And this is my iPhone slow motion. You see how large he is when he comes out of the truck, and he's not wasting any time.
He's feeling better.
He's brand new in his mind. So the best part of that story is that he's got 2 M&R ear tags called 1888 if you want to eat them. And he's got a Bear With Us ear tag. And the best news is we've had no news. So I'm hoping for another 10 years there's no news. But when people live in bear habitat or drive up from the city to bear habitat and they see a bear in their backyard, liking animals or not, quite often, we don't want it here. They're afraid of it. Can't blame them. So they call the police. Well, the police can't do much. The only thing they have to deal with bears is guns. So, you know, if a whole lot of people in the neighborhood call the police and they end up shooting it, it's not really the fault of the police officer because his hands are tied. The best thing is to not call the police and just really know what the animal's all about. So just leave it alone, let it go through your yard. I think relocating a bear is a far better alternative to a potential human-bear conflict than shooting it. But in most cases, almost all cases, we don't have to do that if we just practice a few simple habits that we, you know, as people don't usually have. That big fellow was also very large, and he was such a, pardon my use of the word chicken, but I don't mean that. I don't mean that anything relevant to the real animal that's a chicken. It was 1 minute and 30 seconds for him to come out of that trap. And I banged the trap, I walked around it, I yelled at him. He took his time. Because he was afraid I was going to hurt him. And most people are afraid the bear's going to hurt them. But if we know what the animal's all about and how it really is, that it's not mean by nature, we really don't need to do anything other than just be careful how we store our food. And if you live where there's bears, put the bird feeders away right now when the snow goes away. Up home, we got a few more weeks. But if you don't feed the birds and keep your food garbage stored securely, there won't be a bear problem. If your neighbor doesn't do the same as you practice, there might be a bear problem. But the bear's only going through your yard to get to your neighbors. But that's where everybody can kind of pitch in and say, you know, let's put our food away and let the bears just be bears. Because when you think about it, where can a bear go today when it's not walking across somebody's property? And I say that quite often during the summertime when people phone, because they say, this is my property, I don't want that bear here. So where do you want the bear to go? To your neighbors? You know, or across the road to somebody else's? It can't go anywhere really without being on somebody's property. I'm not going to talk too much about their life history because of time, but they're born helpless. They stay with the mother for a year and a half. They're born in January, and her peaceful winter sleep is over at that time. But the main reason people and bears conflict is because people offer bears food, either intentionally or unintentionally, like bird feeders. And bears come around people only for food, not for the people. It's because they're trying to get enough calories to survive, most importantly, for the 9 months of the year where they exist on either no food at all or a calorie negative diet, energy negative. So they have 3 to 3.5 months to eat enough high calorie foods to put that weight back on so they can hibernate, give birth to cubs if it's a female, and then survive the balance of the year eating grass and leaves, which are low calorie, until the berries get ripe again in late July. So bears are all about food because their life is, they have a lot of work to do for in that 3 months of food finding opportunity. We often hear about how often male bears kill cubs. And the Federation Anglers and Hunters said that, you know, they hunt male bears and they save cubs by killing all the males. So a man I respect a lot as far as the bear science goes, Dr. Lynn Rogers from Minnesota. So I called him a couple falls ago and I said, Dr. Rogers, the number of bears you've collared, how many female bears have lost their cubs due to a male? He said in the 45 years he'd collared bears, he said only one case where he thought a female had lost her cubs due to a male. But he said upon further investigation, he said we were wrong. It wasn't a male bear. Could have been something else, but not a male bear. So it does happen, yes, but it's not very common. And why not? Why doesn't it happen? Well, first of all, bears don't usually find meat as the top of their food preferences. And secondly, not too many large male bears are crazy enough to get in a scrap with a female that weighs half his weight, but has twice the motive to put up a fight. And bears rarely fight. It's all bluster, and the one with the biggest bluster wins, and that's a female bear. So that's why it's unlikely that male bears kill cubs. An old bear in the wilds of Ontario, if you talk to people for the Ministry of Natural Resources, is 18 years old. In Minnesota, it's about the same. And Dr. Rogers says less than 1% reach old age because people kill them, usually hunting. There was a female bear that died of old age naturally in Minnesota in 2013. She was 39 and a half. She'd been collared since she was a 4-year-old subadult, or cub, and they tracked her. She went in menopause at age 25. She laid down and died at 39 and a half, which was July, and they found her body decaying. Nothing had consumed her. There's been bears shot and aged by tooth biopsies at 42 in the wild, and of course they've lived longer than that in the zoo, but that's an artificial, I think that's an artificial lifespan, because zoos are just not the best for bears either. One fact that is not a fact that we read and hear about often is that when bears come out of hibernation, they're ravenously hungry. That's totally untrue. If everything's been as it should the year before, with lots of berries or nuts and fat, high-calorie foods that bears like to eat, this photo was taken on June the 1st. He could hibernate another 5 months. And it's probably he probably really could, because he's a male bear lying there doing nothing all winter. He's not burning off a lot of calories. They don't come out of then ravenously hungry. It takes them about a month of walking around eating grass and leaves and burning off energy and becoming, probably 1/3 less that weight a month and a half after that. That's when they get hungry. And hopefully that time coincides closely with the berries being ripe late July. But that same bear in July would be almost unrecognizable, because he would have lost all that, or about 1/3 of that weight. So it happens after they come out of the den. And even in August, this mother bear, who had 2 cubs at the time, was eating grass, because we had several days of rain. The grass shoots were fresh, just like springtime, and for a bear, that's good to eat. And here's some video I took in May of some couple large males, not looking too hungry either, are they? And this is, I love these shots. Family, relaxing. I'm in a distance, so I'm not interfering, I don't think. And that's late June. So these cubs now weigh about, they're about the size of a house cat. Small house cat. 5-6 kilograms. So, 10 to 12 pounds. And berries are our main source of bears' calories and favorite food, and probably blueberries are right at the top. Hyperphagia, which means always hungry, always wanting to eat, kicks in about mid to late July, and they'll eat 24 hours a day if they find a food source. Just hopefully that's not at somebody's sunflower bird feeder. And like I mentioned earlier, they have 3 to 4 months to prepare for hibernation. The last 4 to 5 months, and for the balance of the year when there's no high-calorie foods available. So bears do eat insects, small rodents sometimes. Sometimes they fish. Sometimes, occasionally, very occasionally, they'll kill a fawn or a moose calf. However, that's pretty rare. And their eating behavior is learned. They follow the mother bear and mimic her behavior. So if the mother bear is a total vegetarian, the cubs, chances are they'll be the same. If the mother bears learned how to fish in Algonquin Park for suckers in May, chances are the cubs will be the same. And there is a population of bears in Algonquin Park that learned that May is the time to go to the creeks and fish for suckers. But as one of the best biologists, in my opinion, in Ontario, bears, Jeremy Inglis, he said, to talk about a mother bear killing a moose calf, he said, that's kind of ridiculous. He said, not any animal that's got any brains at all is going to take on a mother moose. So it's highly unlikely, but it's happened. So like I said, a bear's walking across somebody's property all the time. If we know enough about the animal and understand it, we can tolerate the bear's presence. And that's all we have to do. They're not coming after people. That only happens in the movies. And they're just looking to make a living, just like every other wild animal out there. And they have a tough time doing it because people fear them. They grab a camera when they see a deer, and they grab a gun when they see a bear.